Today's guest is a board-certified interventional cardiologist, professional chef, teacher of culinary medicine, and has over 40 years of experience and has impacted more than 100,000 lives. Today, he's going to share with you new insights, ideas, and information to improve your relationship with food. Would you please help us welcome to the live stream Dr. Michael Fenster? Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Ben. It's so great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. You help make me international. Thank you.
Well, we love food here in Taiwan, and we love it in Australia, but I don't think we have healthy relationships, and hopefully we can talk about those relationships today. Now, I understand with what you're doing as an interventional cardiologist, a lot of people are never going to meet you until they're at death's door. So what is it that you actually do as an interventional cardiologist?
So an interventional cardiologist, we go through all the training, the board certification of a general cardiologist. And then because that's not enough, we like to put ourselves with an additional fellowship in what we call coronary intervention. And really what that means is that when somebody's having a heart attack at 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm the guy they call to go in and open that artery, put something in like a stent, etc.
Wow. So how many years of experience or how many years in training for an interventional cardiologist, and then to be board certified, how much more time is invested into achieve the board certification?
So in the States, we do our training, and it's 4 years of college, then 4 years of medical school, then 3 years of internal medicine residency, then 3 to 4 or 1 to 2 years of interventional fellowship, and then and only then are you ready to sit for your boards, which hopefully after all that you'll pass the examination and be a board certified interventional cardiologist.
So whilst I was out partying for the first 21 years of my life, you were getting prepared to save my life as an older man. Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're quite welcome.
It's just phenomenal, and it amazes me. My father-in-law, he's a professor, and he specialises in, what is it? I should remember the name, but he grows fish species, and I know for many years he has studied fisheries. He has written work in Chinese, and then he wanted to take his technology to Japan to grow fish farms, and he creates these fish farms that are 5,000 acres. So they'll grow fish on a 5,000 acre farm, but organics was really important to him. So he would start to help them build these 5,000 acre farms to create fresh food to give to the fish. So the fish weren't eating processed food. And then he translated his work into Japanese, but he taught himself Japanese. So I've got so much admiration. Yeah. Well, I'd have to say Zhongwen Timbudong, which is Chinese, but I'm not sure if you understand that one.
Well, right there, you hit on a key point because, the perception, the idea that, hey, I'm just going to eat fish because I've been told fish is good for me. But if I eat fish that's been fed all this really ultra processed type of food, we are what we eat, and we are what we eat. And so studies have shown, for example, that early on, when they had these salmon farms first came out, and then people started feeding cheap feed that was processed soy, etc., all the healthful things that we look for in salmon weren't there anymore. The omega-3 went all the way down, as well as a lot of the flavored things, which I can tell you as a chef, that's paramount, right? The food's got to be delicious first and foremost.
Interesting you mentioned that. My experience when I went to Dubai in 2007, I couldn't find food that I was accustomed to. So I went down to Spinneys, which is the supermarket, and I bought cauliflower, broccoli, carrots, and chicken. And I thought, I want to steam it up. I want to be a little bit healthy. And I started to eat this steamed food, but there was no taste to it. There was no taste to the broccoli. There was no taste to the cauliflower. The carrots had no taste. And the chicken, it just kind of fell apart and was this white color. It wasn't pink when you got it out of the package. And it really made me think, what's happening to the food? And the longer I stayed there, I realized that from my limited knowledge, it appeared that there was very little nutritional value in the food.
Yeah, it's something that we appreciate, and everyone sort of gets when we talk about wine, right? We say wine has a terroir. A Pinot Noir from Oregon is very different than a Pinot Noir from Burgundy, and everybody accepts that. And yet, we lose that when we talk about food because we don't really talk about real food anymore. So,
Mm.
real food has a taste of where it comes from. But instead of real food, we've gone for convenient food. And
Mm.
convenient food that, you have that hamburger that tastes the same in Taiwan that it does in Texas, that it does in New York, that it does in London, that it does in Melbourne. And convenient food like that requires consistent ingredients. And so what has happened is we've deconstructed food. So if I was going to take that chicken of yours and make a chicken nugget, and I had a really lovely real chicken, I'd use maybe three, four ingredients, to make it the nugget.
Mm.
If you go to McDonald's, there's 40 ingredients. And it turns out what we're learning, and really only over the last decade, and really only over the last probably 3 to 5 years. In fact, one of the seminal presentations was recently done at the Asia Pacific Conference on Nutrition in 2022, just a few months ago in April. And we really address this process of what we call ultra processing, or destroying the natural matrix of the food, and then we put it back together. And when we put it back together, we add things so it has a longer shelf life. We add things that make it what we term hyper palatable, which is a politically correct way to say we make it addictive, so people want it more and more. Generally,
Mm.
that means adding more sugar, salt, and certain types of fats. And then we add certain preservatives and other things. And again, what we're learning is that it's not the chicken, it's not the taco, it's not the pizza, it's the ingredients that we use to make those things that make a big difference. And when those ingredients or those products are ultra processed across the globe, we are seeing studies that that is what correlates to a risk of disability and disease like obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease. And frighteningly, a study was published just 2 days ago that showed that mothers who eat a lot of ultra processed food, that directly correlates with reduced growth of the embryo. So even in utero, before our kids are born now, they're suffering the ill effects of bad dietary habits of their mothers. So this is a big problem and a big switch that we need to make in the
Mm.
way that we look at food.
Mm. It's an incredible way to look at it. As I mentioned before, we see these American shows here in Taiwan, and it's like the big American burger, the big American beef fillet. And I was watching them cook a rack of ribs. And I was watching them create the sauce, and it was 2 kilos of sugar, half a litre of palm oil, and all of these ingredients, these bags of salt. And I said to my wife, I said, is this for real? Like, I could not process in my mind how much ingredients was going into that bit of barbecue sauce that went over the top. And it started to make sense to me. Things that I would eat as an athlete because I was hungry, I thought, well, if I consume this meat, it's got to be good for me because it's meat and it's just a little bit of flavouring on top. But I'd never considered, because of my own ignorance and not knowing what questions to ask, I couldn't imagine what ingredients actually went into the sauce. And it really, really shocked me.
Yeah, and it would shock actually a lot of people in the United States to know, and you've really hit on something, that the biggest source of unwanted fats and oil in the American diet, what we call appropriately the SAD, the standard American diet,
Mm.
uh,
It is
is
sad.
it is very sad, and it's an unfortunately, something that's been exported through big soda, big snack, big food from the United States to other countries and emerging economies, is actually the condiments. So all those toppings that are going on the burger and the dog and the ribs, that's where the unwanted sugars and oils and fats come from. That's the number one source, along with baked goods in the United States, not what most people think, which is the meat or the fish or the chicken or something like that.
I was reading some information here from the United States Department of Agriculture, and it says the American adult will consume 73,646 pounds of food in their lifetime. So, for our friends who are trying to calculate this in kilos, it's 33,405 kilos of food that's going in your mouth in your lifetime. I hadn't even considered that until today. The other thing it says is that the average adult is going to eat 86,067 times in our life. Now, from a former athlete, if I was going to train 86,000 times, I'd become pretty damn good as an athlete. I'd probably be the best in the world 10 times over. But I know even at 42, coming at 42, I don't have a good relationship with food. And when I was an athlete, I would get so hungry that I couldn't wait to get home. So I'd smash KFC. When I went and lived in the Middle East, I'd get so hungry that I'd eat hummus, tabbouleh, and fried halloumi because I couldn't wait to get home. When I go to America, I'm craving Cheesecake Factory. And I go around the world and I fill myself up with all of these things that are easy because I can't wait, but I also haven't thought through this. I don't believe a lot of people think through their meals. I know I don't. I get up in the morning, I go, oh, what am I going to eat? It's not as if I haven't done it for the past 42 years. But I see this unhealthy relationship with food. What are you seeing from your perspective as through culinary medicine, but also as an interventional cardiologist? What do you see?
I say exactly the same thing, and that's actually the real focus, the foundation of our culinary medicine approach is, to take your relationship, Daniel, and allow you to reconnect, reestablish, and reforge in a positive way your relationship with food. So that goes beyond just what you eat, but how you eat, where you eat, when you eat, and even with whom you eat. And all of these things are very important in your individual food experiences. You and I chatted earlier, right? The first thing, if you're going to spend a lifetime eating, which you do, because once you stop eating, you won't be around much longer, is is that it's important that you enjoy that food, that it tastes good, that it brings you happiness. Now, if we just look at happiness, we adjust for all other risk factors, cholesterol, etc., we find that the happiest group compared to the least happiest group lives almost 8 years longer and lives healthier.
Wow.
So putting someone on a diet that they're absolutely miserable and angry at me every day for doing that to them, I may not be doing them a service in terms of their long-term health. So we have to look at all aspects of that relationship. And in fact, when you think about it, whether it be over bottle or over breast, our relationship with our mom starts with, our food. And and it gets complicated because we process our food experience in the same area of the brain that we process sex. And so sex, is not in human terms simply, a once a year or once a month kind of procreation drive. And that's a problem with looking at food from simply nutrients only. It ignores the very human element of emotion and relationship and all these other things that make us who we are, that are our personal food story. And so it really, really critical that this fundamental building block of all our other relationships is a strong and positive one, because we know from things like the Harvard Happiness Study, where they looked and they asked a very simple question: what are the variables in our life that allow us to live healthy, well, long, and happy? Is it a cholesterol level? Is it socioeconomic class? Is it your blood pressure? Is it the car you drive? What is it? What comes out when we shake that tree, and what falls out? And it turns out it's the quality of our relationships. And we believe in culinary medicine that our relationship with food is a foundation stone for all those other relationships that we build on and occur. And I bet if I asked you, top 10 moments in your life, at least 3 to 5 of them, if not more, would have some element of a food or a meal or a celebration uh,
Mm.
involved in them. Food has been the social currency of the human species since we became human.
Mm. Now, I'm processing this, what you mentioned about the relationship with whom you're eating, where you're eating, how you're eating. And when I was 30, my wife gave birth to our first child. And I always saw these men with the dad bod. And I heard these jokes about the dad bod, and I was like, well, I'm 82 kilos. I'm pretty lean. I'm not going to get the dad bod. I'm going to be the one who avoids the dad bod. And for the first couple of years of my daughter's life, I didn't have the dad bod. But once she started to turn about 4 or 5, I started to put on weight. And what I saw was my wife putting more food on my plate. So when my wife finished her meal, but there was leftovers, she put it on my plate. And she's like, you got to finish the food. And so, okay, I'll eat her a little bit. But then when my daughter wouldn't finish what was on her plate, it went onto my plate. And I had to finish it. Now, I was the guilty one for wasting food. So there's this guilt and this shame when it comes to eating, these emotions. And I don't want to let them down because we're in an Asian family. And then you go out, and I remember my wife's grandmother. I was looking skinny. Now, that wasn't good in this culture, so she wanted to fatten me up. So the meals got bigger, the plates got bigger. And then my son came along, and so I've got my wife's leftovers, and I've got my 2 children's leftovers, and I look down and I go, I'm 100 kilos. And it was like overnight, I was 100 kilos, and I'm trying to figure out, how did I get here? But it was that relationship, and I'm processing, these emotions. Guilt from the family, the shame of taking back food because you don't want to embarrass yourself or somebody else. And there I was, and then I said, I got to make changes. But even at 42, I thought to myself, I don't even know what's good for my body anymore. I seem to eat fish, like you were mentioning before, but I might put on weight. I might eat lean pork, but I might put on weight. I might eat vegetables, and I might put in a spicy soup, but I'm putting on weight. And I think, how is this possible? But I don't know what's happening with the food.
And I do know. And one of the answers, one of the variables that's sorting out, again, over the last couple of years, is the consumption of ultra processed food. And I'll get into what that is in a minute, because I want to share with you a very important study that was done about 2 years ago here in the US by someone who disagreed with me for about a decade and said, Chef Dr. Mike, you're crazy. He said it meaner than that, but you're crazy.
We get the PG version.
Processing, it's all about the nutrients. It's just the nutrients. And the fact that people eat too much saturated fat or sugar or something. So he designed an experiment in which people ate a diet that either was ultra processed food, so Honey Nut Cheerios and Eggos and things like that in the States, or it was not ultra processed food. So maybe some of the things you were talking about earlier, like a homemade soups, etc.
Mm.
And what he did is he matched it so the calories were exactly the same. But then he did something that nobody had done before, which was, and I give Kevin Hall from Harvard credit because he's a brilliant guy. He matched the macronutrients and everything else. So it had exactly the same amount of saturated fat, the same amount of sugar, etc. And then he watched what happened. And the people on the ultra processed food diet spontaneously gained a pound a week, and their markers of inflammation went up. And when they switched to the diet that was exactly the same in calories and exactly the same in macronutrients, they spontaneously lost weight, and their markers of inflammation went down. And so Kevin's conclusion was, I don't know what the food scientists are doing, but whatever they are doing is making Americans sicker and fatter. And that process of ultra processing is not just in America now, it's worldwide. So we have to shift. And this is one of the important, if not one of the main goals that we have in culinary medicine as we teach it, to not look at food anymore in terms of macronutrients and protein and saturated fat and carbohydrates and this and that. Fortunately, it gets much simpler. Is it ultra processed or not?
Mm.
Now, when we say ultra processed, we mean a specific type of food. It's what we call a Nova Group 4, and that comes from the Nova classification, which was developed by Professor Monteiro and his colleagues at the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil just over about a decade ago. And it's food, as we talked about earlier, that has that matrix destroyed, that has certain things added to it. And there are some specific definitions that we use. I could give your audience a real easy way to identify ultra processed food, which is flip it over and look at the ingredients list. Don't even read it, just count. If it's got more than 5 ingredients, then there's an 85% chance that it's an ultra processed food. And the longer that list, the more likely it is it's ultra processed. So you don't even have to read it, you just have to count it. But that's a little kind of down and dirty, just kind of quick guide. And if people start looking at that, I think they'll be amazed. I had a friend of mine who's an athlete and a professional cyclist, rides in competitive races. And he said, Mike, I turned over these energy bars that I thought were so healthy, and they were all ultra processed. And I was like, yeah. And he said, and they cost a lot.
I was consuming one of those protein shakes in a bag, and it was all natural. And my wife said, "Husband, you're putting on weight." I said, "It's not possible." I said, "It's the leanest, it's the greenest, it's the best." And she said, "You're putting on weight." And eventually, I was putting on weight. And if I could now visualize what was on the list on the back, it must have been the whole back package that was listed out. Must have been. So I stopped that one. Here in Taiwan, what I see the difference to other places like Australia, when I go to the shopping centre and I go to the supermarket and I want to buy vegetables, I look at the corn, and every corn is the exact same size and dimension. And I don't think nature grows corn at the exact same shape and dimension, and there's no blemish on the outside. You move across to the tomatoes, and there's the exact same amount of tomatoes on that little bit of vine, and they're all the exact size, and they're the perfect colour. And then you go over to the capsicum. We call it capsicum. I think you call them green peppers. They'll be perfect shape, perfect size. There won't be a blemish. And then you go to the bananas. And for a time, there was straight bananas. I'm like, bananas don't grow straight. So I have these images in my one of my uncles was a banana farmer, and I remember going to his farm, but I've also got family who are in the primary industry. And so then I came to Taiwan and I went to the local markets, and I went down there and not one cauliflower looked the same. There was blemishes, there was dirt, and it wasn't wrapped in plastic. And I thought to myself, oh, this can't be good because it's not perfect. And you went through every other bit of fruit and there was nothing that was identical. But as soon as you bit into it, it actually tasted real. There was a taste to it. The taste buds got excited and lit up. And it's taken a big adjustment because I think the marketing in Australia is so great for food. The colours, the blemishes have all been removed. The wax is on there. And then you come over here, but there's no taste in Australia. You come over here and everything's got a taste. You can smell it. I remember my dad, he was a farmer. He could smell the fruit. I'm like, what are you doing? But you get here and you can actually smell it. And
yeah, you're touching on, and that's the real food, right? That's, as a chef, you just excited me when you talked about real food, because that's real flavor. And that's what I want to use as my ingredients to put on a plate, and you're going to find something that's delicious. The stuff that has no taste, the stuff that we talked about, earlier, a McNugget that's made from 40 ingredients and tastes the same everywhere in the world. Just because it tastes the same and it's safe, that doesn't mean it's the best choice. Certainly, I'm a big believer in technology. I use it in interventional cardiology. We want to use the latest technology, and employing that and automating it and doing it the same way every time is exactly how I want my pilot to land that 747 that I'm flying in. I'm not sure it's the best thing when it comes to our food.
We have family in Sydney, and they grow mushrooms. And there's about 110,000 kilos of mushrooms grown at one factory per week. And there's about 175 people harvesting the mushrooms. And when you go into the farm, you can see them growing. Not one mushroom looks the same, but the smell is just so rich, like that fungus as it grows. And those mushrooms are from farm to plate within 24 hours. You know, you could be picking fresh mushrooms and they could be on the plate by tonight. And when you bite into these mushrooms, the taste is just so rich. It's so natural. When you cook it, you can smell the mushroom smell. And when I go back to Australia, I love to eat those mushrooms because I know where they come from. I know how they're grown. But when I eat, like you said, these hamburgers from McDonald's, that's with these 40 different ingredients in the chicken nuggets, that's frightening stuff.
Well, yeah, and you think about it, right? What you're experiencing is what nature gave you to survive.
Mm,
Things that have great flavor to you and are really good for you taste great because it brings you pleasure, which means you want to eat it again.
mm,
And so that's just nature at work. That's just sort of acknowledging, the great interconnection. We've so divorced ourselves from nature. We've so walked away from that natural relationship to the food we eat that we consume things that human beings have not evolved ever to eat over the
mm,
last half century, 75 years or so. And now we're seeing the repercussions of that. We're paying the price for those things. We look at the effect of ultra processed food, not just on our human frame, but it turns out that they alter in a very negative way the gut bacteria, the gut microbiome, which is so critical for our health that really within the medical community, we now look at it as a symbiotic organ. It is in constant contact with our brain, with our immune system, with our GI system. If I were to draw a blood sample at any time, a random blood sample, 40% of the communication molecules circulating around originate in the gut. So there's this vibrant, backdrop of information that we may not be cognizant of in terms of being consciously aware of it, but it's affecting us
mm.
all the time.
I remember hearing something about the hunas of Hawaii, and they'd say, if you eat it and you feel good, eat more. If you eat it and you don't feel good, stop eating it. And I think that addiction you're talking about, I think we eat things like McDonald's and later on you don't feel good. My energy is depleted. My bowel movements absolutely change. And the next day I wake up and I feel like there's something that I've got to replace. There's something missing. And it's like, okay, where's the sugary coffee? Like I might have a black coffee with lemon, but in the morning I want the sugary coffee. It's like I'm depleted and I need to get spiked up again.
Well,
And that's a tough one.
well, it's tough because that food is engineered food. So there
Mm,
was a very good book written by a former head of the FDA here in the United States called Dr. David Kessler. And what he did was after he finished his term as at the FDA, he went around to all these companies that make these ultra processed foods and looked at how they made it. And these are engineered foods. They engineer for something called a bliss point. So a bliss point is different for different foods, and it's the point at which I have combined maximum ingredients, particularly sugar, salt, and fat, to give you the most essentially buzz by turning on your dopaminergic reward system in your brain before you start to get perceptions that it's too salty or too sugary and you don't like the taste anymore. And the idea is I want to cram as much sugar, salt, and fat because those stimulate in much of the same way as opiate medication does, which we've also done a really good job with here in the United States. Um, the reward centers are dopaminergic reward centers. And so, for example, in a potato chip, I might use more salt because we expect and we desire a salty, crispy chip. But
mm,
in a donut, I might want more sugar if I'm looking for a sugary dessert. And when I put those together, I get that bliss point, so that's what you start to crave. And then my competitors' chip or donut that doesn't have as much sugar, salt, and fat in it, hasn't had these other components in it. You don't like that as much because it sort of doesn't give you that unconscious stimulation. So when we're talking about these ultra processed foods, we're really talking about an engineered food, a food that, as I said earlier, is hyper palatable, which just means I'm making something that's as addictive as possible.
It's like gamification. If I
It
can get a
is.
little bit more there, I can make a little bit more, get a few more coins. It's crazy. Even these chips, my mum would air fry chips at home. And I like that because I could see her cutting the potato and going to the air fryer. But I was watching one of these shows how they create the chips. And I used to think, yeah, if you eat chips at McDonald's, they're going to be cut up into little straws. Nope. Totally different. So
Yeah,
we're going to be able to
totally different.
we're going to be able to change this relationship. What do you see as some of these short and long-term risks to the individual for having a poor relationship with food, for consuming the wrong things? You know, if we go back to it, we're going to put 73,646 pounds of food in our body through our life. That's our fuel. If we make bad choices continually, where are we going to be in the future?
Well, we already see it. We have a pandemic of obesity, type 2 diabetes, things like cardiovascular disease, GI disease, and irritable bowel disease on the rise. So we're already seeing the complications of that. And in fact, when we look at countries like the United States and many other westernized nations, once a country gets on that upslope, in terms of the increase in obesity and diabetes, there's not one country out of the 195 countries on the globe that has been able yet to reverse that trend. And so we see sicker and sicker populations at younger and younger ages. And here in the United States, we're on the verge of an explosion because a recent study showed that from the age of 5 onwards in the United States, the average American consumes 70% ultra processed food, just about more than anywhere in the industrialized world. When we look at things in countries like France and Italy for comparison, and France is always a good one because they eat more saturated fat than we do. The French still eat more butter than anyone.
Mm.
Um, as a professional chef, I love French cuisine. That's what I was trained in. It's absolutely delicious. But their rate of coronary disease is a fraction of what it is in the United States. But their consumption of ultra processed foods is also way less than half of what it is in the United States. And in fact, I looked at this recently, and where you see lower rates of the consumption of ultra processed food, where you see people consuming more indigenous diets with the natural foods of those areas, you just don't see the rate of disability, disease, obesity, diabetes, and all the rest.
Mm. I see it when I go back to Australia. I'm 6 foot. I'm relatively healthy and fit. I've got a personal trainer. We walk 2 to 3 hours a night. And I'm 100 kilos, 6 foot. And I'm small when I go back to Australia. And I'm very small when I go to America. But I'm big here. I was buying extra large shirts here. And I said to my wife, I said, I think I'm getting too big. And she said, no, they're Asian, extra large. So it's good to know I'm still in a large. But I can see it. The girls are developing younger. The boys are developing younger. And after spending time in the Middle East, the obesity pandemic there, when I was in Dubai, in that Middle East region, you could see it. The size of people was just becoming out of control. Here in Taiwan, we have small wheelchairs. After my wife had an operation in the UK, they had these extra large wheelchairs. And then when I saw this 600-pound life show in America, they had these wheelchairs that were almost the size of a small vehicle. And you can see it. And it makes sense as you talk about these ultra-processed foods. It really makes sense. In my experience, when I've traveled in America, last time I was there, I was in San Diego for 2 weeks, and I said to my wife, I can't wait to get home because I haven't gone to the bathroom. I haven't defecated in 2 weeks. I said, I look down, I feel pregnant. So whatever I'm putting, I wasn't pregnant, but whatever I was putting in my stomach, it just wasn't coming out the other end. And my stomach was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I was doing my best to try to find healthy restaurants, but I couldn't find it. And I knew that something was happening in my gut, and it wasn't healthy.
Quite literally, yeah, when you change your diet like that, you change the bacteria. So if you generally eat a reasonable diet of fresh, real, wholesome foods, and you have a good, healthy gut bacteria, it doesn't take many, meals of the standard American diet with the fast food and the snacks and the other ultra processed ingredients to literally change both the character and quantity and the quality of your gut microbiome. And then, it was Hippocrates over 1,500 years ago who observed it then. All disease starts in the gut.
We've got to keep relearning until we get it right. Now, you've got some incredible content here on the internet, and I'd love to share it with our audience. So you've got a great website here, chefdrmike.com. What can we learn and what can we take away from your website?
Well, you can learn a little bit more about me. You can learn all about culinary medicine that we talked about. We have an online course that I teach at the University of Montana. The course is actually through the University of Montana, so you can get an accreditation, a micro-accreditation from the university on completing it. There's some recipes there. You can also follow me on social media and connect. And I'm not famous, so I answer all my own stuff, and I'd love to hear from folks.
Not famous. 46,000 followers.
Well, it's just here in the States, Kraft macaroni and cheese is just not going to get out there and spread my message.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today and knowing what we put into our mouth and what it's doing to the body. I think we all have to learn to understand this. We're all going to eat 3 times a day for the rest of our life, and we've got to get it right. And I think for my audience, who's between the age of 35 to 45, I think we wake up at this stage and we look down and we go, this is not my body. Like, you look at it, you just tend to wake up. Like after 10 years of having kids, I went, that's not my body. I think I need a different one. But you're going to be stuck with that one body for the whole life. So you've got to learn to take care of it. So make sure you go to chefdrmike.com. I'll also put the link to your socials in the show notes. Ladies and gentlemen, go and follow it because you are what you eat. And I think the principle of junk in, junk out is so true.
And we can make that food that's good for you absolutely delicious.
Oh, yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? I think that's the fear. A lot of people have been accustomed to think good food doesn't taste good. But my mum, as a farmer's wife, she said to me once, she said, Daniel, when I was on the farm with your father, I cooked him a salad one day. And he come home and he didn't eat the cooked salad. She says, now the cooked salads are famous around the world. Thanks, Chef Dr. Mike. Greatly appreciated. Thank you for your time. And ladies and gentlemen, my pleasure. Remember, one new idea at the right time can change your life. And remember, all disease starts in the gut. So you've got 3 opportunities every single day to get it right. Chef Dr. Mike, thank you so much for your time and have a wonderful day.